What is up, you guys? Welcome back. Thanks for joining me again. Today is part 2 to a series. I will link the first part in the show notes below. You can go and listen to that first. I'd highly recommend it. But we are talking about how fear and separation can drive a lot of things in our day-to-day, in our personal relationships today. So we are talking specifically about resistance to the present moment or resistance to what is. We also talk about this tendency to overplan, overcontrol, being hyper-controlling. We talk about getting defensive. We talk about the inability to ask for help, and we also talk about how we tend to assume the worst in people, thinking that it's malicious when maybe it was just an accident. We talk about all sorts of good things, the antidote, of course, to all of these things, and how they arise out of fear and separation. So, if all of that sounds good to you, thanks for joining me. Let's get started. Welcome to the Get Out of Your Head podcast, where we talk all about the stories that keep you stuck, blocked from manifesting what you really want, and away from your authentic life. I am your host, Sarah, from Spirit, Mind, Body. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Thank you for joining me for my bonus episode today. Hey, if you missed it, please go back and listen to part 1 to this. In it, I talk about how when you're in this space of fear and separation, you will miss all sorts of things, to include gratitude, synchronicities, and you'll end up doing things like chasing, grasping, and hoarding, which really just adds to the cycle. I talk about how there's no possible way that we can be isolated and alone. There's no way that we can exist without our environment. And I get into all of that, but really the goodness is there. And I would love to recap it and do all that stuff, but I just don't have time today. But you can go back and listen to it. So if you are interested, that's all in the beginning. And then at the ending is when I get to synchronicities, gratitude, and that chasing, grasping, hoarding kind of thing that we do. Today, I am talking about how this fear and separation, this feeling of being separate and the illusion of being alone sort of shows up in our relationships. And I think this is really valuable. Well, I think everything that I do is valuable, of course, otherwise I wouldn't do it. But I think this is really valuable, especially in our one-on-one relationships, because if you don't realize that you're in this fear and separation mentality, or if you don't realize that this is where it's coming from, you'll sort of end up pushing people away when they're trying to help you. What we actually need when we are feeling alone is connection, but this story sort of tries to It pushes you further away from other people and away from that connection. And that's exactly opposite to what you need. So I'm just going to get right into it. The way that this story shows up is it starts forcing or needing things to happen. This is the part of you that just cannot have faith, right? This is the part of you that says, I need to take things into my own hands. And what I can say is that this manifestation of this fear and separation leads to an incredible frustration. And actually, when you're feeling frustrated, it's usually because you have something in your mind that you want to happen and the stars just are not aligning for you. You know, the reason that we want anything is how it's going to make us feel. And so when we're feeling frustrated, we have to take a step back and ask ourselves, is this goal that I'm pursuing fulfilling my intention for it? And if you're feeling frustrated, maybe you need to let that ultimate goal happen. So for example, say you wake up in the morning and you're like, I want my Saturday to go this way. We just want our Saturday to be, I want to get this done, this done, this done, and the stars just don't align. Things are not happening for you. And all of a sudden you start to feel really frustrated because you wanted to get all these things done. You want to get the things done because you want to feel probably accomplished, or you want to feel like you can kick your feet up and relax at the end of the day, or you want to feel happy. But when you're feeling that frustration, You're not feeling any of those things. You're not feeling happy. You don't feel like you can kick your feet up. You don't feel accomplished. You don't feel any of those things. You feel frustrated. And that frustration is an indication of resistance to the present. And that resistance is a product of you thinking that you're separate and that you're separate from your situation. Let me remind you that you are not separate. The universe just has something better that happens for you. Whenever I am so attached to what needs to happen, when I'm attached to that outcome and it doesn't happen and there's things stacking up, it's usually for a good reason. And the universe sort of like sets me up at a better time anyway. But again, I come back to this point that this is the part of us that just cannot have faith. We just don't trust that we would be provided for, right? When we're really attached to outcome, we set ourselves up to be in this ego story. So we end up saying things like tomorrow has to go like this, and we have this grand vision of like how it's going to be. Or I am going to this party and I have to connect with somebody and I have to make this connection, or I need this person to do this thing for me, or my launch needs to make money, or I'm a failure, or I have to get that job that I've been applying for, or I have to be with this person that I'm pursuing. And you might be like, well, what about manifestation or affirmations? Don't we use affirmations and creating goals and envisioning outcomes to create what we want? The answer is yes, you do, but you have to realize that you're using those things to evoke an emotion within you so that you can feel what you want to feel, because the feeling is the attractor itself. It's not what the thing is. When you cultivate that feeling, you don't need that outcome. But the irony is that when you cultivate that feeling, things effortlessly come to you because you sort of become that person. You attract to those things because that's the feeling within you. It's only when you don't need something, letting it go, that it actually comes to you. To get kind of philosophical on you, I kind of think that's the point to life. It's realizing your own personal power. And that's the root of it. You realize your own personal power by realizing that you don't need things in your external environment to add up the way that you thought you were going to add it up in order to make you feel good about it, or in order to make you feel a certain way. And then it's also realizing the power that you have the ability to attract anything you want because you don't need it. Does that make sense? All that to say that I'm not saying don't have goals. In fact, I advocate for having goals. But it's a delicate dance between recognizing what's within your control and letting go of what's not in your control, and being okay with how everything shakes out. Having faith that it's all happening for the better. So here's my practical tip for this one. When you feel resistance, or you feel like you need to force things, or you're feeling really frustrated, what would happen if you just decided to go with it? Could you come to peace with that? Whenever I've done this and I've decided to lean in and have faith and put my idea of what needed to happen to the back burner, or put it aside for a bit, I've always genuinely been surprised at how well it works out. It actually works out for the better. What's to say that that's not going to happen to you? Okay. Secondly is kind of related. I think that all these points kind of can mesh together. I try to separate them, but you know how it goes. The universe is not separate, and so of course they're gonna overlap and merge with one another. But so the second thing is over planning or over controlling. In over planning or trying to control, I'm mostly am talking about other people, right? When the ego sees itself as extremely separate, it gets really afraid and really lonely. And the way to transcend that feeling of isolation or fear is to dominate. Domination gives you this feeling of connectedness. It's this false feeling of connectedness, but it's not real. It's really overwhelming to realize that we're pretty alone in this lifetime. It makes us feel powerless and small and insignificant. So our natural reaction is to try to regain some kind of power or control over our environment. And you can actually see this a lot in the animal kingdom and with kids. So if a beta male is dominated by the alpha male, kind of like put in its place, the beta male will actually turn around and take it out on some other member of the pack as like a dissipation of energy. Kids do the exact same thing. They tell their dolls to like go to sleep, or that it's time to get dressed, or they'll put Emma in timeout. And that is their way of controlling or gaining power back in a world that they have very little control over. They dissipate that feeling of helplessness, where they kind of regain that power by playing pretend or doing it with other kids or something like that. And that really helps them to dissipate that frustration or that negative energy that comes along with having an agenda and being told, no, you can't do that. It's their way of calling the shots when they don't typically get to call the shots. And so we do this too. It's a really natural reaction. And I think that there's different types of control here, and it's not all bad. I try not to write things off as all bad. It's not helpful. And to be honest, even if something's a natural reaction for you, or if it's innate, or if it's instinctual, you're probably just going to default to it anyway. And so we have to find a way to make it okay versus just writing it off completely, because then you're just going to put things into the shadows. Okay, so there's this version of toxic control, which sort of sees people and situations as a method to serve the individual. So toxic control comes with trying to control someone else's emotions, thoughts, or beliefs. This shows up in the way that someone's manipulative or indicates that you're not allowed to feel that way. This version of toxic control tries to control somebody else's belief system. It's funny, like people actually do this all the time. You're not allowed to think that. You're not allowed to believe that. You're not allowed to feel that. And the truth is that people are entitled to feel any way they want to feel. There is no such thing as a wrong feeling. There's no such thing as a wrong thought either. But we get hell-bent on trying to control other people's thoughts and beliefs and their own internal world, which really never works. But then there is positive control, which is you not allowing the world to crush you anymore. This is being productive and decisive and authoring your own story, and where you stop settling for things that don't bring you joy. The positive control is this type of control that helps you break away from that inner victim by saying, no more, I'm taking this into my own hands. It's positive control that helps you turn your life around where you need to turn it around. The main difference between this type of control is that it's directed inward, or the other type of, toxic control, I don't really know what to call it, you guys. So just bear with me. Toxic, not good control is directed outwards, right? And that's actually a really good marker. If you're trying to control something, ask yourself, is this inward directed or is it outward directed? Is your control focused on things that you actually have control over, or is it on things that you don't have control over? When we focus on things that we actually do have control over and let go of the rest, you start to realize that life gets really, really easy for you. Whenever I'm just having an off day, it's usually because I'm trying to control things that actually are out of my control, just like my last point. When we let it go, the universe shows us something even better. Another thing to note here, while we're on the topic of control, is that when you're fearful or when you're really afraid, you actually also become very easy to control. When decisions are made out of fear, they're rash, hasty, not thought out. We'll buy into quick fixes that don't really give us a lasting solution, but provide that illusion of security and control. And it might not even make much sense. This is the main thing that I see with the media. Every headline and every news story is intended to put you into a state of fear or to get you worked up about something. We have to ask, am I being manipulated? I think that's a really worthwhile question. And if your answer is no, then your answer is no. But if you ask the question and you go into your heart of hearts, does it feel like you're being jerked around one way or another? If watching the news feels right for you, then have at it, of course, but it's worth asking that question. Most of us have never stopped to ask these questions. And I did a whole podcast episode on navigating the media. And if you're interested in that, I will link that in the show notes below. It's worthwhile. I think we all could gain to kind of set some boundaries and put our own mental health as a priority and stop allowing these media headlines just to pull us in any direction that is totally out of line with what we actually want, right? It just pulls us out of our center and it sucks. So The third thing that I have is you will get really defensive. When you are stuck in fear and isolation with other people, you take things personally and you'll start to get really defensive. So remember that when we come in this world, we have this overwhelming sense that we're super separate and very alone. The ego actually helps us cope with that. That is a very good thing, right? The ego allows you to not be crushed by the world. It defends you when you're feeling threatened. This is a good thing, right? As an individual, we could become easily depressed and crushed by this world if we didn't have something within us to stand up to the external world and advocate on our behalf. So thank you, ego, right? Let's just take a moment, honor the ego. Thank you. But when we become adults, we learn the truth that we're not separate and that we're eternally held and protected by universe, source, God, whatever you want to call it. We can start to let this idea go. There's no logical reason to get defensive. And I say logical, I'm not writing it off. We get defensive, all sorts of reasons, but it's not logical. I talked about this in my denial episode, but when you get defensive, you have to ask yourself, what are you defending? The truth doesn't need your defense because it stands on its own as self-evident. When you feel the need to defend yourself, it's usually because there's an energetic match within you, and your defense is probably covering up a shadow aspect. You can only stand to gain incredible insights that make life worth living and really set you on your most highest, your ideal dream life path when you bring the shadow to light. Your shadow has the answer to all of your problems and questions. Your shadow is exactly where you've been blocking yourself. Your shadow is where you think that you're unworthy of your manifestation, and so you subconsciously keep blocking yourself from manifesting it. Your shadow is why you have a hard time with this kind of relationship. Your shadow is why you feel like you've capped yourself at a certain earning potential. Your shadow is why you feel like you just can't get out of your rut. Your shadow is so powerful. There's a shadow episode tentatively coming January 4th. It could be earlier than that. Stay tuned. But yes, getting defensive. Ask yourself what you're defending. Take some deep breaths. It's not that easy. Allow yourself to feel the depths of your emotion, every single thing. Don't write yourself off. And that's really how you can sort of come to peace with these shadow aspects. Okay. The fourth thing that I have is the inability to ask for help. Hi, I'm Sarah. I have a problem asking for help. This one hits home for me so hard. So let me just lay out how this all shows up. So your ego will tell you that you're burdening somebody else if you ask for help, and that you don't want to burden them because you want them to like you. Like, that's more subconscious, but really it's like, it's really loud. You're like, I don't want to put anybody out. I just don't want to burden them. That's really the story that goes on. But when you can't ask for help, it really leads you further into separation. You don't want to burden somebody because you want them to like you and you want that connection with them. You kind of subconsciously, this all goes on under the radar. But you sort of subconsciously am like, well, I don't like being burdened. And so, I don't want to put that on them. And so we drive ourselves, like I said, into further separation. And it feels like we're on this island doing everything alone while others stand by. And what will happen is we'll start to build some resentments. So if you have this story, it's probably because you've been burned somewhere in your past by asking for help. Or maybe your upbringing was your parents telling you, don't ask for somebody for help. That's putting them out. Your job, I remember specifically my parents saying, your job is literally to make somebody else's life as easy as possible. Do not ask for something that you could do yourself. That's generally the message. I think that's a really, the intention behind that was really powerful, and that was a really good message to receive, but internalized, and if taken too far, it really sends us on this path of, I can never ask somebody for help when I need it. I can't reach out a hand and trust that somebody else would be willing to receive my request on the other side. And in my adult life, a lot of what I've had to do is this undoing of these deep-seated beliefs or these messages that I've internalized in the wrong way. I don't want to say in the wrong way, but I've internalized these messages in a way that don't serve me. And so I have to sort of question them and look at them and pick them apart and look at them from different perspectives and undo them so that I can live in a way that is more in alignment with me. In doing so, what I have come to realize is that who is saying somebody doesn't want to help you except for you? You make all sorts of assumptions, deciding for another person what their reaction is before you even know. So here's some perspective for you. And I feel like I've kind of like done this work, and so I can share this and take what resonates and leave the rest. But I'm just going to ask you a couple questions and give you a couple statements, and you can decide if it fits for you or not. So first off, a lot of people like helping. Think about if you're asked for help and you genuinely feel like you can bring value to a situation, don't you like helping? It's not taking advantage of somebody. If somebody actually needs help and they reach out, a lot of people genuinely want to do it. Maybe if they like the job. The second thing is, for some people, it makes them feel needed and valued, and that's better than feeling isolated and alone. And who's to say that that person isn't in the same boat as you, feeling isolated and alone? Your request for help could be that thread of connection that they've been missing. For other people, asking for help is actually a learning opportunity, and it helps you connect with them. When you ask somebody for help, and I think this is my main point, when you ask somebody for help, you make it okay for them to ask you for help as well. And that asking for help builds trust. And that is the way through the ego story. The fear and separation is what tells you it's not okay to ask for help. But when we build trust with people and we can reach out for that hand, or we have that thread of connection now, that is what connects us. That's the way through the fear and separation. Okay, the fifth thing that I have is that when you are in this space and your ego is really like going out of fear and separation, you will assume the worst in people, and you assume that people's motives are sort of malicious instead of accidental. So when you're in a survival state, you feel alone and defensive, and if you're in this ego story, you'll assume that people do things to hurt you, however small, even if it's not a deliberate hurt, but more of an annoyance or something like that. You assume that they're doing it intentionally. And I think this kind of comes from the point that we talked about with control, that when people are hurting, they tend to try to gain the upper hand by inflicting that hurt onto somebody else, right? We usually are trying to move out of a very painful place. And so by trying to grasp some version of power or control over another person, it elevates our emotional state from hurting to anger. And anger is more powerful. It has a lot more charge than just being hurt. So if I'm hurting, I can feel a little bit better by diffusing my pain and inflicting it onto somebody else. Think of it energetically. And this is what the ego or survival self assumes and does quite naturally. So what we do is we sort of ask somebody to hold our pain. We don't ask for it, actually. We just thrust our pain onto somebody else, and we're like, can you hold this for me? I'm done. I don't want to feel this pain anymore. And so by lashing out or by being aggressive towards somebody else, we're dissipating that energy, and we're also forcing somebody else to hold what we couldn't shoulder. But what I have found is that pain can connect us too. The more willing that I am to feel the depths of my own pain, the more able I am to hold space for somebody else and become compassionate towards them. When I can show love to myself by sitting with myself in all of my pain and discomfort, and without trying to escape it, or without trying to displace my pain onto someone or something else, I become more and more able to do this for somebody else. And I start giving others the benefit of the doubt. When I understand myself and my natural tendencies and how fearful I can become when I'm in pain or when I'm hurting, the more I can understand that if someone else is trying to inflict pain onto me, that they're still in just this reactionary state. And I would say, like, as a side note, psychopaths and narcissists aside, I'm talking about normal, regular people that are just hurt. I'm not condoning or approving of someone else being disrespectful or hurtful towards me or for anybody else, but I do get where they're coming from. If I go with my natural reaction, which is a backlash or to get really defensive or even worse, aggressive, it just makes the problem worse. Can you envision two people, one person's hurting, they come home, they have a bad day, yelling at another person, and then the other person just gets defensive and then just adds fuel to the fire, and it grows and grows and grows. The more I do this work, the more I'm comfortable sitting with myself in any state that I'm in, the more that I'm okay being in pain or being sad and just sitting with it until it dissolves and understanding it, the more that I can look at someone else who is trying to dissipate their energy onto me, and I can get where they're coming from, right? And that's coming from a place of fear and separation. So when I see that, and when I can look at them and find that thread of connection and say, what do you need? That dissipates it so much faster, and it doesn't grow into this crazy monster of a problem. It just stays really small, and that's really what that other person needs. That other person needs space. And it's not saying that I can hold somebody else's pain for them. I never can, right? That's not our job as individuals. We are not able to hold somebody else's pain. That's an illusion. That person has to hold their own pain. But this is why healing is so important, because the more I heal, the less I'm going to get triggered. The less I take things personally, the less I can see somebody as evil or malicious or directly attacking me, and the more I see the other side to that. It's just like we were talking about, where do you shine the light on an aspect of a problem? In every situation, you can shine the light on any place, and you can see things from a totally different perspective and have a completely different experience because you looked at it a different way. And that's exactly what I'm talking about. If I just shine the light on somebody who's angry and who is taking it out on me, if I shine it somewhere else and I see, oh, okay, that comes from a place of fear and separation, the antidote then is so obvious, and it's connection and empathy and compassion for that person. It's not easy to do, of course, and it comes with a lot of healing. The work that you do before that situation happens is everything. So never write off a healing opportunity. Never write off a time where you can sit down and be present with yourself. Every time you do, you're giving away an opportunity for you to heal, yes, but that can be alchemized. By alchemizing, I mean that pain can be turned for good. That pain can be used to help somebody in need, even though they look like they're trying to push you away. But if you write off these opportunities, you sort of miss them. And it's not saying that they're not going to come back and find you. Obviously, opportunities will come back and find you. There is never a shortage of opportunity to heal. But, when you can face it, and the more you do it, the more you do it for everyone, right? This is how we break cycles, you guys. This is the way. This is the solution. All right, that is what I have for you guys today. Thank you so much for joining me. I always enjoy having you listen, and it means the world to me to connect with people like you. So with that, I will see you guys next week. If you enjoyed this episode, I would invite you to subscribe, share it with someone you know, and leave an honest rating or review. You can also connect with me through Instagram at spiritmind.body, through YouTube, or my website. Links to all of these can be found in the show notes below. This work is not easy and requires tremendous self-reflection, grit, and a willingness to be misunderstood, and for that, I honor every single one of you for showing up for your authentic self. Until next time. Hey, you guys, thank you so much for sticking around to the very, very end with me. I just have one last announcement for you. If you enjoy these episodes and you'd like me to produce them every week instead of every other week, which is something that I would love to do for you, there is a donate link down below. What this helps me do is outsource some of these things that I just don't have that much time for, such as editing and producing this podcast. If you don't know me, I am a mother to two very little kids and I have a full-time job already. And your donations really help offset some of the costs that it takes to produce on a weekly basis. Also, if you do not know me, if you have not connected with me, I'm primarily on Instagram at spiritmind.body. I would love to hear from you. My last episode of the season, which will be in April, is going to be a Q&A. So if you have any questions, comments, any way that you'd like to connect with me, please do head over to Instagram or on YouTube. Drop me a comment or a message. I would love to hear from you. Thank you guys. I love you guys so much. I will see you next week.